And we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome back for another live. I am Giulia de Mauro, the IBD Hub founder. And today I'm having as a guest Rebeca Ramos. And we're going to talk together about the epidemic of architectural isolation.
Do you have it?
Well, yeah, I've heard of it. So, Rebecca, please tell me a little bit more about yourself and a little bit of your background so our listeners can really understand your perspective on the subject.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, Giulia. I am a Venezuelan trained architect. I started as an apprentice in Venezuela and had the luxury of having a multidisciplinary career since the start. I started very young while I was studying, and in parallel, I dipped my toes into production, not only of events, but editorial production, which is a fascinating world, and graphic art direction as well as editorial production, and started to get a general sense of how to be in touch with conversations with audience and the final users of the buildings that we're designing or the spaces that we would be designing, all the way through to sitting down and starting to think about it from the design table. So that's kind of how things started, and it really just spread from there. It carried on with the same trend for the last now 14 up to 15 years of professional career. And I've dipped my toes since continued on my architectural trajectory, and then dipped my toes in arts and industrial design, and continued in event production, which I find fascinating. And that eventually all came together in some incredible projects that were taking a kind of a public-facing angle for either a small organization with ambitions of a very large impact on people, which is kind of seems to be where we're at as a society at the moment, or thinking about big cities. And the thing that called my attention was the isolation we had, not only between ourselves and architects, but also with other creative disciplines that could be fitting into the conversation. There's a lot of people and a lot of different professions that are looking at similar issues in our culture. We can take as an example last year. And we seem to be in isolation trying to figure it out and kind of in a race to see who figures it out first. Whereas kind of my question was, what if we start working together and collaborating across disciplines a lot more, and using the specialism and the strength of each one of the creative disciplines to kind of have a maximum impact. And that's where I'm kind of at the moment, and where One-on-One was born, and that's the premise under which we're working at the moment.
Yeah, so can you summarize in a sentence what is the problem that One-on-One is solving?
The problem the One-on-One is solving is providing a service of pretty much strategic guidance for clients who have an intention and do not know how to reach a completed product. And that might be, that is usually, we're tailored to complex creative projects that would entail kind of a multitude of creative fields, mostly based around design, media, and technology. So as an example at the moment, one of our extraordinary clients, they're usually private clients that have this issue. It's like commercial clients have an infrastructure around them and under them, a business plan, an entire kind of system that allows them to engage with specialists. Whereas in the case of usually individuals or younger organizations that are trying to do things that have not been done before, or are trying to do extraordinary projects, there is rarely guidance on how to go from an intention to how to get to the point where you can speak to a specialist to ask for an exact ask. And in my previous experience, what would happen is that these clients have enormous ambitions, enormous kind of appreciation for the arts and creativity, want to be very much involved, want to invest their money with good value, and there is little to none guidance on how to create a great brief and how to find the right person for what you're trying to do. And usually what happens is when we are approached as designers, then we're trying to get the project ourselves, right? So we're trying to make sure that we tailor the ask for something that could fit us.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I agree. And how from all your different lives that you had, how did you came to this conclusion that there was a gap in the market for that? Is it like your background and all the experiences that you went through and all your passions, or is it while you were working that you found that there was this issue of the client not being able to elaborate on a program that would successfully achieve what he wanted to do in the first place?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting what your question is posing. I don't see it as a crime problem. I see it as a problem of us as designers, and not particularly because we are to blame out of anything. We're a symptom of an industry that's kind of focused extremely on a specialism, which has developed some extraordinary things out of it. But in that specialization, we've kind of ended up in a point where we're having a conversation with each other and with the trade or with people that can speak the same language. And there's a kind of a big gap of communication with people who are out there and the people who are ending up using our services or potentially being our clients, right? So that was the first thing that I noticed. And when you say many lives, I'll clarify, because Giulia and I have spoken before. I've lived in quite a few countries and kind of a nomadic nature creature. And I've been born in Venezuela and then lived in Spain for a while before moving to the UK for the past 8.5 years. At the moment, I have been in the United States on business for the past month or so. And I keep kind of traveling and have spent some time in Mexico recently, seeing the incredible kind of creative outburst that's going on there. So in that migration as well, and seeing like the different ways in which we understand culture and the different issues that we may have as different kind of societies. The other kind of part of that isolation for me was something fell off for me to sit in a design room somewhere in London when I'm trying to sort out a problem for a local culture that's really far away, right? And there is something there that can be bridged in many ways. It can be bridged with communication, with us learning and opening up as to how to communicate a little better with the people who are ultimately going to be in our spaces or using our experiences. And then also our process. And then that's when collaboration for me became, well, other than being extremely curious and interested in other things, I must say now, I didn't want to study architecture. I kind of ended up in architecture from a kind of performance and events and all other kind of background. And so my inkling is always to be close to people and to be at the forefront of how people are seeing that, which is usually so far down the line from an architecture project, right? An architecture project can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years to complete. And it's usually kind of the opening is done and then the building kind of hands out. And for me, that also felt incomplete in how I wanted to perceive and conceive things, mostly driven by experience. So I think there's a great potential in communicating with particularly the creative industries that are connected to culture. You have an extraordinary power in advertising and in production companies that are generating events and activating a lot of the times the buildings that we design and figuring out how to tell stories that are reaching a high number of people. You have an extraordinary kind of strength in performance and in art to be able to move people and to do things that maybe our space are not able to do, and that together can create a more interesting experience.
Yeah.
So the gap really came from seeing how when there was a kind of extreme collaboration and openness, like it was the case, for example, of Maggie's leads between the team and the client and the people who were ultimately inhabiting the building, then something beautiful came to be from that.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting conversations that we're always having was where did we end, right? Where did the building end? Did it end in the wall, or did? And my belief is that it kind of maybe that's how we see architecture, and maybe what I'm doing is something completely different, which is why I founded One-on-One. And I see architecture as a stage for life, and really doesn't really get to come to life until people can do what it's intended, or what they intended, or something if they didn't even think possible within it. Yeah. So that's really where it came from. And the kind of idea of forming a business out of it came from, again, experience of having been around some wonderfully visionary clients that came with this problem of, I have this intention of an idea. Yeah. I believe it manifests in a building, but it also manifests in an event, and it also manifests in an art piece. And there was little, being in a kind of architectural design studio, you have to go like, can you just go and figure that out and then come back when you're ready? Yeah. And then they were like, where do we go? Like, who do I speak to help me take this? And someone who has the experience to have done it, to help me carve it in order to make it either appealing to the type of designer and teams that I want to work with, or to reach the ambition that I'm willing to invest for. So that's really where the idea came from.
Yeah. So in the end, you're a bit of an architect of the manifestation. So someone has like someone has like a feeling or wants to achieve something, but they don't really know like how to materialize it or where to start, and you're just there to take them through the journey to find out exactly what would be the outcome of it. Right?
Indeed, that's a kind of long-winded way, and the commercial way would be very simply to taking an intention from an intention to an idea to a strategy to create a project. And that usually what happens is then there's creative direction across all of that. So that allows for all the steps to create what would be, a great design or creative aspiration that then leads to 1 or 2 or 3 briefs, depending on what the project is. We just had this experience with one of our clients where they approached us with an idea for something very small. And it was an art piece, and they were curious, they wanted to learn how to do it, they wanted to be involved in the process and to collaborate with the team that were willing to do it. And then that peeling off, I think I made this metaphor to you before, of when someone comes to you saying that they want a house, and they say, I want a round house with a pool in the middle and a tree on the top that looks on the side like that, and they have a really specific idea of how it's meant to be solved. And it's because we're not normalized to have the vocabulary of explaining what we're trying to achieve without concrete answers, right? So they're trying to solve the problem without having identified it, because we don't necessarily have the vocabulary for it. And once you start peeling back, you might realize actually the best solution for what this person wants is a cabin in the jungle, for example. And they end up loving it even more. So it's a similar process of discovery. And in that process of discovery, we realized that this kind of one small thing was meant to be part of a larger experiential exhibition, which is fantastic to then collaborate with amazing producers and designers who do incredible interaction design. We're now collaborating with a team, like kind of alumni of MIT Lab in New York City, which is incredible. And then thinking about how that piece will be experienced spatially with the audience, and finally with the final messages. And the kind of resulting fantastic thing about it is that you end up leaving a legacy in a client that is engaged, that is understanding and is able to converse with the creative process is a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps even making more amazing projects with a lot more people.
Yeah.
There was this one conversation I had once with Dame Laura Lee from Maggie's, and I was asking her I don't remember what the conversation was, but there was a message about what she would like to tell people about Maggie Centers. There's a lot of wonderful things being told. And I remember her message was that she wanted to promote how to speak to designers, because people find it so
hard,
just very inaccessible a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's our job to figure out how to bridge to make ourselves more accessible, because that's, we're ultimately providing a service. And the more we can reach the people that are hiring us and using our service, the more great things we can do.
Yeah, it's really funny. Like what you said for some reason triggered me to think about the fact that when I was a kid, when I was a child, I wanted a superpower, and my superpower was the ability to touch people and make them see what I wanted to build, whether it was in Legos or something else, right? Or paint or whatever, because I could never put it into words, right? So for me, it was like the power of being able to touch someone, and that person would be able to translate it into a project or help me to make it happen. And I feel like this is exactly what you kind of do, which is great and amazing. And the more you speak, the more I've seen, the same issues as you see, like, at university, especially in the architecture field, we are very much used to stay between architects. We pitch our projects at university to other architects. Once we start working, we think about the developer or the client, but we kind of sometimes forget who the client is and who the users are, right? There is we're kind of lost in translation because we're so passionate about the project, and we dive so deep in it that sometimes we forget to have the overview over everything, and being able to kind of direct the client and the users towards the right answer, right?
Or find it, or unveil it from them, which is also another part of it. A lot of the times they have the answer, and we just need to help them find it, and that's totally fine. I think you hit on something wonderful about the fact that we were not necessarily giving the tools. What you just said about pitching projects to other architects, I think that's brilliant, and it's very kind of sharp of you to have noticed, and that makes it quite challenging, right? Part of being in many studios, one of the most challenging things is to get to a client and try to understand exactly what are they after. When you've got a corporate client, say that you're working with a developer or working with someone who has a commercial interest, and they try to understand, well, how are we going to communicate this if it's just numbers and and where they're trying to reach. And in that, you have another step that's kind of further away from the user. I like to focus on things that are direct, that generate human connection. They're public facing. There are projects that are leaning towards the arts and events and human connection a lot more than commercial buildings. And I'm kind of implementing the architectural strategy of how to, we get the incredible superpower of understanding many specialists and understanding many people who are extraordinary at what they do, and being able to speak to them and figuring out how to put things in a way that it gets them excited, right? Sure. And that in itself is a fantastic skill to have. And it's kind of, what if we direct that in the other direction and start talking to the people who need us? There was another anecdote I told you when we were talking about this event was me speaking to an extraordinary urban designer, and I think he once made a quote or made a statement that went a little controversial about how architects and designers only build, and I'm paraphrasing because I didn't read it, but about 5% of the buildings in the world. And when you think about that, it's okay, so it's 5% of the buildings. There's 95% of the population that might either not feel that we're accessible, not see the point of us,
Well, that's a huge statement, yeah.
Or understand what we're here to do. And I think that in general is something that I found quite interesting in the profession. My eyes were open to it very young. In this magazine that I mentioned, I was back in Venezuela. I was collaborating with some extraordinary people in culture, and some of them were writers, and they were constantly going on about, every time I brought in a piece that I'd worked on with kind of thought leader in certain aspects that we were talking about, they were horrified. It's like, this is not written for people. And that was the kind of mission of the magazine, to show how to, and I kind of ended up in this weird role of educating this, like, kind of pushing this 50-year-old man when I was really young to try to figure out how we can make things be just simplified in order for everyone to get it. And it's still challenging. I find it challenging today.
I agree. And I see it with my clients, like I help a lot of architects and real estate developers to really communicate what is the problem that they're solving and how do they go about it in their unique way to solve it. And most of them don't know how to articulate it in a way that is simple to understand. So the exercise that I make them do is, imagine you're pitching to a child. A child doesn't know anything about architecture. So how can you explain to them what you do? And that's really a key exercise for architects, especially.
Yeah. Well, I think for everyone who's had a specialism, I don't think it's a problem only of us, but it is definitely a challenge. I've found it challenging myself, as I said. And talking back to the impact that can be made in projects, there's when you were referring to your dreaming superpower of what you would like to, how do you like to manifest the idea of what you want into someone else's heads, which is pretty much kind of the start of every project with one-on-one is exactly that. It's trying to figure out, how do we translate what's going on in your head right now onto something that everyone else can see? And that could look like a mood board, or the performance, or someone rambling on for hours. Like, what is it that you've got in your mind that you want to start with? And that's the first step, so we can all have it on the table and look at it. And then there's, I think, particularly with creativity, we have, I believe, it's my stance, we've become so obsessed with technique that we've forgotten quite a big part of what we do, which is about emotion and about moving people and reaching people. And I think a lot of the inability of describing an ambition and an aspiration is that a lot of it is emotional vocabulary. And in a lot of it, you're trying to inspire a certain feeling or a certain impact, certain memory. And if we're disconnected from that ourselves, it's very difficult for us to connect to that in anyone else. But also it's not something that's normalized in our way of speaking. However, when you look at some of the most amazing, that's what musicians do, extraordinary artists, that's what they do. And that's what great movies do. And that's what, great pieces of architecture organization, that's what Maggie Centers do. They invoke a feeling when you're in them. And that's kind of the direction in which I believe it's wonderful to go. I think there's, particularly where we are at now, my interest is to have a holistic view on experiences, design, and spaces, and art, and all around collaboration the maximum reach of creative projects. Because ultimately, wouldn't it be wonderful for everyone to be able to be creative and to engage with each other, and to have conversations about better cities, better environments, better experiences. So I think it's only wonderful for people to learn how to engage with us. It's not like we're revealing the kind of secret sauce to the magic trick of what we do, but the more people try to understand and engage with it, I think the better off the work and our experience will be.
Yeah. So I'm a big believer that if we want to innovate within the architecture field, we need to start including more people that have a different perspective on the project in the design team since the start. So whether it is including startups with new technologies, or adding historians to the projects, or people that know about the social part of the community and so on. I believe that the way to move forward is to actually include more people to the table. So what is your opinion about how can the architects, what would be the benefits of integrating more creative disciplines within these design teams and these projects, actually?
Oh man, I think it's endless. I think the only problem would be that we would remain relevant. I think it's only amazing. It's I think there's only possibilities in it. The best way I can try to answer that question is that if we go back to this conversation about culture, you think about the speed at which culture is moving right now and the speed at which architecture can move. And if we try to kind of invert the process of a building and a space, and you start with ultimately experience, which is what we're trying to reach anyway at the end of it, and you build backwards from that, which is kind of where the world is at. Sure. You start engaging with kind of a firsthand need of what people might be after, what means a lot to them. And this is why I'm speaking as someone who has been in the architecture field, but I'm a non-architect now. I like to, I kind of, I've extracted the strategy and applied it to something else, to creative strategies, because I'm interested in more than just physical spaces. To me, physical spaces are one dimension of things, and a dimension of things that is a lot more permanent than a lot of their experiences we're having. So I think the more, there are buildings that might be taking 10 or 15 years to build, and by the time they look completed, they might be irrelevant in terms of the premise that they were built with. Whereas if you're constantly collaborating with technology, with people who are in the heart of culture, even with, commercial brands, even with, what people engage with, then getting a sense of how space is and the contribution we can make as well to how spaces can be used, experiences can be had and shared and designed and thought about, and the impact and legacy of them. I think there's only kind of positives from that, but it is quite a challenge because it's not something that we are accustomed to doing. It requires a lot of effort to develop a relationship with someone who speaks a different language than you. It's kind of, multiracial dating.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I just feel like any architect that is willing to go international and build in a different country, in a different community, is kind of responsible to be in touch with other people that know the users and the communities better.
Well, I kind of go in and do it myself and embed myself in it, which is why I travel so much. And
Yeah,
that was one of the things. And I don't really know what the solution is for the industry. I'm kind of proposing an alternative with the proposal from One-on-One and what it's doing. But I think it can only be kind of more nutritious to get involved and engaged and embedded in a place, and to speak to people from different perspectives. I think there's often a lot of the speed at which things are done, business is done. It's also sometimes an obstacle to try to bring in different points of view. I have been in when I was inserted in other studios and trying to do that, there was a need to kind of quickly figure out and transform what that relationship was going to turn into. How are we going to transform this into something? And those things take time. They can take time. And sometimes the processes are developed in a way that, it's very hard to allow for that. So I don't really know what the solution is within the existing infrastructure. I'm kind of creating a project that expresses that point of view, to do it as an alternative, and then see how far that goes. I also, the other premise is the model with which the business is built. And I talk about One-on-One as less of a studio, more of an agency, because it allows for strategically to define the direction and the creative direction of where we're going with a team that can be made out of people from different backgrounds. And then once that is complete, then the kind of pieces of the puzzle can be made by people who are very good for the job. And that's kind of in the benefit of the client, the idea. And it's not trying to force kind of the people that I have at hand to kind of deliver that project, but rather trying to find the right people for that idea within our means and within what we can do and within our expertise. So it's a very very tailored service. And I think, if there were kind of more people doing it, would be amazing, because then it would be a hyper connection of a multitude of people. It would allow for also freedom of different creative fields to continue doing what they're doing. And then when we come together, we bring experiences that are complementary. Whereas I think one of the challenges I've seen with trying to do too many things in-house is that you kind of start trying to control the things that were meant to be challenging the way that you do things, because they have to be part of an organization. And so the freedom of kind of an independent or a smaller kind of practice doing craftsmanship or making or research or whatever, and the agility that they may have, is then kind of molding itself into certain processes that have to do with scale that might end up preventing that. So I think, there's a lot of innovation that can be done in the way we create and think about businesses. Also giving room, my response with kind of an agency model is the idea that, and you can plug in people aligned by values and skill sets. And the possibilities of that are, of course, fantastic. There's a network that's formed. It requires forming of community, and relationships are constantly being maintained. So it's a different way of looking at things.
No, I think the word value is key here, because for each project, actually, if you really want it to truly work, you need to select the people that have the same values and that find that project pertinent enough that it's not just a project anymore, right? So when you talked about, have like working with people that are like, about speed and money, it has to be done and so on, I think it's because it maybe doesn't come from a value standpoint, and it's not a project where they invest to learn, but it's more like a project for the project itself, right? But I think that the way that is interesting how you described it. It's about taking the intention of a client and that has his own values and world in a way, and gather also people that believe in the same things in order to make the project happen, right?
And can enhance it. So what's what ends up happening is a collaboration, really, because the client becomes a key part of the process, and the we've had clients that are experts of what they do, and we're just supporting strategically, or clients that, as I just mentioned, are kind of dipping their toes into the creative world, which is amazing to be involved with, and they want to learn and they want to understand, right? Yeah. So, and that's lovely. That's a lovely thing to support, and then to be able to take an original intention and transform that into something a lot larger and go, is this something that you would like? Yeah. And the kind of eyes just start like sparkling, and yeah, quite possibly. Or maybe you shift to, and then it just becomes this really beautiful thing, and you're kind of a team working together rather than kind of being on two sides of the spectrum. And I very much enjoy that, and that's that's why the kind of intimate nature of what the business is in itself. Yeah. And I think, going back to your question about collaborating with technology and different professions, I think I've kind of stated it a couple of times. And I think one of the reasons I decided to go off on my own and to collaborate, particularly with technology companies and media, is on top of the speed of culture, was also 2 years ago, I was starting to question how we were going to be experiencing spaces, events, and art in the future because of the technology that we were having access to.
Yeah.
And I felt that, yet again, sitting down in a room talking to my colleagues who are looking at the same thing as me every day was probably not going to give me an answer to that, a curiosity. And that it was probably more of a venture and a risky venture rather than something that I was going to find an answer in within, an existing model of something. And that's literally, what's happened in the last year. All of a sudden, we've completely shifted our ways of, and we're still trying to grasp how we're going to be engaging with each other. And, there are a lot of conversations about whether the office is going to have a thing or the other thing. I'm more interested in, what's happening with culture and music. How are we experiencing music? How are we experiencing dance? How are we coming together en masse or in smaller groups? How are we connecting with people from different places? And this is not something that is going to be solved in the next year. We might be vaccinated in 3 or 4 different countries, but there are some others that do not have access to that. They're still part of a wonderful ecosystem of culture. So I think those challenges, posing those challenges and seeing how we can apply the strategy and the knowledge from architecture onto other fields and vice versa, is just very exciting to me.
Yeah, because I don't know if you perceive it the same way, but I feel like prior to COVID, it was very much like everyone on fast pace and, doing instead of feeling, and kind of, getting caught up in a big machine of business and globalization and so on. And then with COVID, we all collectively started being more aware of the spaces that we are in. For instance, like how are we actually living? We developers, at least I'm talking about architecture because this is the part that I'm more aware of, let's say. We were trying to make the smallest apartment to make the most benefits. And then with COVID, we found out like, okay, I need to be here like the whole day, and I need to use this space to work and sleep and have my kids here. Also, like the impact of nature on people has been of great help during these times, right? Like people have noticed actually contact with nature is key to live a healthy life, or like music, you know, how many people have spent the months of isolation listening to music, and being aware of how good that does to their health and so on. So do you feel like people are now shifting towards more these creative fields because they've seen the importance of it?
I hope so. This is a conversation I had at the start of 2020 when the pandemic went out. I was speaking to an artist in London on a live about it, and my prediction was that I hoped that it would make the arts become more important and more relevant for everyone. And I think that's particularly, I believe that's happened. And now with, the innovation in the blockchain and allowing, people to all of a sudden have this boost of, now we can create and give value to things that we were not able to assign value to because the economy didn't know how to put a price to that or how to put authenticity to that. And now we've cracked that problem and figured it out. Now you've seen the appetite of people that were working in technology or in finance, all of a sudden jumping onto the creative world.
Sure.
And I think that's quite telling. And it's not because it's new, but some people might be looking at it because it's new. But I genuinely believe it's because everyone, to some degree, wants to be engaging and involved with it somehow. And all of a sudden, this is providing a kind of window into that by saying, well, we can now do it because we can engage with it, we can understand, we can dialogue with it through this angle. So we're now in the same circle and we can have conversations that we weren't able to have before because we share something. And that something might be a value system that we assigned to it. But yes, absolutely. And I think, when you think about the next generation of people that are going to be consuming anything, they're mostly doing it virtually, and they're mostly doing it in experiences that are immersive and that are not in the real world. And one of the biggest challenges in production, and I believe one that architecture should be concerning itself with, is how is architecture responding to that? How are we interacting with that technology and with that curiosity, the possibilities of technologies that, frankly, we've known for a long time we were using to model a lot of the buildings that are out there now, but it's now become widely kind of spread. How is that changing our conversation and our engagement with audience? And I believe that is where the smart thing to do is to collaborate with people that are in that all of the time and to start exchanging knowledge and creating some stuff that might be a lot more exciting for everyone.
Yeah, I love it. And tell me, my last question to you is, how do you see one-on-one evolving in the next few years? And it's a difficult question, but I would love to hear your vision for it.
It's a great question. I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I can't say that I'm particularly set on one vision, but what I've always wanted, and I think the three things I set out to do when I designed this business was to, one, kind of depersonalize it. It's a personal business, but it's deep in that it's very personal in the way that it supports its clients. But I wanted to find a way of working that could be replicated and promoted and kind of spread out to other people. So my premise was, if one day I were to sell this, could it be packaged as an approach to doing things?
Yeah.
That for two reasons. One, because I think it's a great way of looking at businesses, of this thing of like, this is what am I giving? What am I creating that could be, if it ends up being better served by someone else in the future, then fantastic. And the second one is because I like doing many things. I wanted to figure out a way of not having a kind of identity confusion between myself and this project. So what I would like is, I'm enjoying so much. It's a new baby, and seeing how people are engaging with the idea and going from to, oh, now I get it. And we're starting to promote that or figure it out, or we can then complement this with our agency, because we usually get clients that need to have a very clear brief, and we wouldn't be able to work with the people that you're bringing us if you weren't in the middle bridging from where they were to something that was attractive to us. right? Which is a budget, a brief, a time, a scale, if and these people are extraordinary, but they wouldn't have been able to speak the same language, right? So ideally, I would like to have a small team that could keep this going and continue to do it. I don't know if scale, I've never really thought about it becoming anything too gigantic, but how many people have said that? But I should hope it's really kind of a set of strategists and a set of partnerships. So I'm hoping that it would evolve naturally. At the moment, it's just giving me an enormous pleasure to do things I love and to be working with amazing people and have an excuse to talk to them and to go and see what they do. So that's where I'm at the moment.
That's amazing. I wish you all the luck with it, and even though you don't need luck, of course, but I think it's a great way to look at things. And I told you before offline, like, I think that when people travel a lot, they're able to be the link for communication between people of opposite worlds. And I think that you're using your gift in the best way. So yeah, I really appreciate you, and what you do is really important. So you can be really proud of that, for sure. And there's not many people that take the leap of faith and design their own career according to what their gift is. And I think that takes a lot of maturity and awareness as well. So it's really beautiful what you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that.
Could you tell people where they can find you, where they can contact you?
At the moment, the best place for that is LinkedIn. So the audience here are on it. I'm usually on it. We're working on the best way to communicate to the world what we're doing and the format of that, and trying to find partners for it too. So that's in the works. You've kind of come into my life right when we're in the middle of that. So yes, please, anyone that would like to get in touch, please do so there. And then we'll be developing the kind of portals and everything else further in the next month or so.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for coming on this podcast. It was a pleasure to have you and see your perspective on things. And I wanted to thank everyone that came to the live again this week. And this episode will be broadcasted on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, so you can listen to it again. And yeah, I see you next week. And thank you, Rebecca, for being here.
Thank you, Giulia. Thank you for having me.